today, and it's the second most celebrated birthday in the world, next to Jesus. And his birthday gets a lot of celebration in these parts, but I want to honor Nelson Mandela with a poem. The name of the poem is Amanla Ngawetu, and that's Xhosa, Mandela's language, for power to the people. And throughout the Defiance campaign, and in many of his speeches, he would say Amanla, and the people would respond Ngawetu. So the name of the poem is Amanla Ngawetu. Oh, Mandela, I think over time and at the behest of history, you grew a grandmother's heart. Your arteries delivering the elixir of honor from ancestral spirits. And a tribal chief's grandfatherly authority, your forsaken inheritance. Your veins suffusing your children's children and all of Africa's children with inextinguishable dignity, and your heart pumping a passion for peace and unity in the tortured bodies and souls of fellow inmates. Ah, Mandela, I think you understood what grandmothers know about letting go of today's desires for a future they can scarcely imagine. Your Winnie's passionate embraces, your children's magical imaginings and longed for bonding, and the wild spirits and tender voices of anybody's children in your island prison, where inmates were transformed by your books and your ancient wisdom, and where Afrikaner jailers were served up tea, refreshments, and forgiveness in your office cell. Blessed by your renowned grace and unquestionable moral authority, a lifetime after they began their hopeless project of breaking your will and extinguishing your spirit. Amanla Ngawetu, power to the people. These are the words you brought to your people. I think you knew an ancestor's power lies in knowing that to make undreamed of possibilities happen, you may need to let go of all that you loved, so that you could bequeath to us your gift of Africa, sutured, healing, her children walking together, arms linked, into the pure blazing light of African skies, with a whisper of their Mandela on their lips, shouting Amanla, and hearing your triumphant response, Ngawetu.
Very much. Okay, without further ado, welcome Professor Badiou, last lecture.
I begin by one question. One question. I find the opposition between desire and law fascinating. Could you address the apparent contradiction in Plato, where Socrates submits to the judgment of the law, to his own execution, as an act of resisting the law itself? It's a very dialectical question, because it's a problem of contradiction, pattern contradiction. On one side, Socrates has been, from the very beginning of his existence, in the idea of a society. For example, in his master book, The Republic, there is no question of law. The idea of Plato is that if everybody knows the idea, if everybody is in subjectivation of the common good, there is no necessity to write laws. The law is inside everybody, not as a law, but as an orientation of life. And so it was the goal, the real goal of Plato to propose a society, a collectivity, without, in fact, a real state in the sense of the transcendency of the law, people and the state and the law. It was the idea of a purely immanent law, which is the ability to decide in the sense of the common good in everybody. So the question for Plato was not the law, but education. And it was in the idea that with a good, real, fundamental education, you have no necessity to organize the society around a law. But at the end of his life, Plato becomes more skeptic about this possibility. And maybe it has been the experience of the terrible situation in Greece with war, with conquest, with violence, with civil wars, and so on. And so the last book of Plato, the title of the last book of Plato is The Laws. So you have in Plato himself a change from the point of view of the possibility of an immanent regulation of societies under the orientation to the common good, to a more difficult possibility, which is to create good laws. And so it's not the same thing to propose an immanent orientation of the societies without the state and without the law, but by a common conviction concerning the common good, or to have the search for good laws. Naturally, the good laws are the laws for a correct orientation of the society in the direction of the common good, but it's not the same. There is something which is much dark in the last Plato. The vision of the world is not so optimistic. And it is all that is two different visions of the trial of Socrates. The first vision is the law was a bad law, and every law in some sense is a bad law. If Socrates has been sentenced to death, it's certainly because the law is a bad law. And when we have the profound experience of a bad law, you have two possibilities. The first, the more radical possibility, is to say finally every law is always a bad law. There is no good law. It's the law itself which is not a good thing, because the law is separated from the will. And all the problem is not the good law, but the good will. And the good will is the will to act in the direction of the common good. It has been the first orientation of Plato and of the Socrates of Plato. But at the end, it was not in the same idea. And we go to the direction of to find something like good laws. And so, concerning the decision of Socrates to accept the law, there is an ambiguity. There is an ambiguity between the two orientations. In some sense, Socrates says, I accept the law because the law exists. It's the law of my city. so I accept the law of my city. He don't say that the law or the existence of the law is a good thing. He only say it's the situation, the law exists, it's the law of my city, so I accept to be somebody of this city. But there is no judgment concerning the law or the existence of the law, only that the law exists. But maybe it would be better that the law does not exist. And in another sense, Socrates is saying, by my death, it will be evident that the law is a bad law. And it's, in some sense, a sacrifice for the understanding of the question of the law. If the law is finally the death of Socrates, that is for Plato the death of the wisdom, the death of knowledge, the death of philosophy, we can conclude that the law is a bad thing. But after that, you have the choice. It's a bad law, or every law is bad. And two very different political philosophies. And there is in Plato two different political philosophies, not one. The philosophy in the Republic, the philosophy in the laws. And it's not the same. And when, after reading Republic, you read the laws, it's a strange feeling. You have the impression to enter in a dark world, violent and difficult. And it's why I think that when you become an old man, is my situation, you must pay attention to don't become too septic. Too skeptical. Because so many negative experiences, so many failures, so many hopes without realization. At the end, you have the temptation to say, okay, all that was, in some sense, my illusion of youth. But now I am with the wisdom of the old man, and I can hide not the Republic, but the laws. And it's for me what the Chinese name a professor by the negative example. Don't be as Plato at the end. Be as Plato at the beginning. That is my answer to it. Profound question. We were in 1988. We were in 1988 with being an event. Being an event, my first complete attempt to create something new in the field of philosophy. And I have explained simply the nucleus of being an event, the center of the problem. Being an event has not been a success, a public success, not at all. Being an event was during a long time an invisible book. Only my colleagues, my philosophers' friends, understood that being an event was really something. And so I have discussion, text, public discussions and so on with Jean-François Lyotard, Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, Jacques Rancière, Gilles Deleuze, Jean Toussaint de Santi. So, in the middle of philosophers, the certain importance of the book was recognized. But at the level of public audience, practically nothing. In the newspaper, nothing at all, complete silence and so on. It's only very progressively that this book clearly becomes the beginning of my existence, my public existence as a philosopher, finally at an international level. The success was coming not by this book, but by two small books in this story. First, Manifesto for Philosophy. Manifesto for Philosophy in 1989, the year after being an event. And the second, and more important concerning the success, not in my sense concerning the philosophy, was Ethics. Ethics in 1993. And Ethics in particular becomes quickly international bestseller. And what was the contents of these two small books? The manifesto was strictly a short exposition of the most important concepts of being an event. It was being an event for children. Or more classically, it was like do many great philosophers. For example, Descartes. Descartes writes Metaphysic Meditations. It was a difficult book. It was a success only for specialists. But just after, he writes the Discourse of the Method, which has been a bestseller. So I was imitating my friend Descartes. Okay, if the big book is for the future, the small book will be for the present. And it has been the case for Manifesto for Philosophy as really a short and clear exposition of the most important concept of being an event. Ethics was a different case, because Ethics is a book which is in the public discussion concerning, in fact, the question of human rights. The question of human rights, we are in the beginning of the 90s, it's really something very important at an international level. And it's a book which proposes to say that we cannot construct a real ethics only with the notion of human rights. So it's a book which goes against the dominant opinion, clearly. And at a level which is not the level of big philosophical construction, but much more simple at the level of descriptive and immediately analytic intervention. I think in ethics, we have a negative idea and a positive idea. The central negative idea is that we cannot have a true ethics of human rights because there is no common definition of what is a human being. First, we must precise what is really humanity, a human being. And so there is no evidence of human rights without an understanding, a common understanding of what we must respect in the human existence. And in fact, we know that in certain circumstances, violence, for example, is inevitable. Defensive violence, for example, was a necessity in many circumstances. And so, in any case, we must decide what is human, the signification of the adjective human in the expression human rights. Because, for example, it was a remark of Lacoue-Labarthe very soon, the Nazi proposed a clear definition of what humanity is. For example, a Jew is not really a human being. And Lacoue-Labarthe was saying that finally Hitler was a very humanist, which was that Hitler was fighting for human rights. It's true. Hitler was fighting for human rights under its proper definition of humanity. And humanity has the right to kill false humanity. The Jews, for example. The Jews are false humanity, and to completely respect the human rights, you must destroy the false humanity of Jews. And so on. There are many examples. Even in France today, there is a dominant definition of human and of what is really human, which is a part of which is a negative one. For example, a Muslim is not exactly a human being. It's clear for many thinkers today in France. Many things that Muslims must do are not acceptable in the vision of human rights. And you have many examples. So the question, the first question, is not human rights. The first question is, what is human? What is human? And you must propose a common vision of what is human before the possibility of speaking of human rights. Because we have many examples of possibility to affirm human rights in a context which finally is a context of violence and extermination. And at a general level, without the saying a pathological case of fascist, Nazism, and so on, for me, the capitalist definition of a human being is not at all my proper definition. Because the capitalist definition of a human being is that it's an individual which has as his proper goal the realization of its proper interests. And if you find a treatise of economy in the side of capitalism, it's the definition of human being. Human being is defined by his or her interest and nothing else. But I don't accept human rights if human rights finally are the right of private property. So at a very general level, I can say that the dominant definition today of what is a human being is not acceptable by me. And so the true discussion is what is a human being. And so we come to the positive idea. Ethics, in my conviction, must be defined for the ability of every individual to become a subject. That is properly my definition of a human being as a real human being, and not only as a living animal. There is a distinction for me between living animal and human being. And naturally, human being is also a living animal. But first, human being is a living animal. Second, human being is something else than purely a living animal. It's the recognition of the ability of every individual to become a subject. And so we can define what is no good, what is evil. It's all that deny the ability of every individual to become a subject. What must be refused, what must be the point of the fight concerning human rights is all what deny, what negate the ability of every individual to become a subject. It's easy to be afraid by violence, murder, and so on. And we must be affected by all sides. No problem. But it is less easy to accept the idea that every human being is able to become a subject. And in the detail, we can say that very often in our societies, many persons and many laws and many dominant opinions refuse absolutely the ability of every individual to become and to be recognized as a true subject. There are enormous quantity of conditions or to recognize that every individual has the possibility to become a subject is something unconditional. It's the first affirmation. If you put some conditions to that sort of recognition of the ability of an individual to become a subject, you are outside every rational notion of human rights. Because you don't accept the existence of humanity, in fact. Because humanity is precisely composed on the basis of the recognition that every individual is able to become a subject, a complete subject. No? And you know, it's a question everywhere in society. For example, to recognize that every child can learn. Not at all the case. Not at all the case. It is not recognized, in fact, that a young boy of the suburbs of a big town is able to learn, and that you must organize this possibility. that the society must organize a complete possibility for this boy to learn and to have the means to become a subject. It's not the case. It's not the case. There is in fact apartheid between the children. One part without any real ability to learn and to become a completely human subject, and a small part in good schools and so on, learning their duty of human beings. So, you know, it's a really fundamental discussion. It's a fundamental discussion. And it's a discussion of, finally, what is humanity? And is humanity under conditions, or if humanity is unconditional right? And the unconditional right, which must be recognized, is the right to become a subject. And before the right to become a subject, you have the recognition that the possibility to become a subject exists in every individual. And communism, there is many definitions of communism. But maybe one of the definitions of communism is that communism is a social organization, the basis of which is at all levels the recognition of the possibility of every individual to become a subject. And from the very beginning, it's not the case in a society organized on the basis of private property. Because the distinction between which are the property and which are not a property is, from the very beginning, a condition concerning the possibility to become a subject. It's for this reason that ethics has been an international bestseller. Because it was really, in my conviction, an attempt to go to the really fundamental point of the question of human rights. And not to say only, oh, it's horrible that many boys and men are killed. Okay, it's horrible, but why? Why is this sort of, why all that happens? And what is your definition of humanity? And there is only inhumanity in poor countries? Is we are perfectly human in our quite Western world? All that was, in fact, to deny the real of human rights. And I return to the beginning, fundamentally, the recognition of the ability of every individual to become a subject is the unique maxim of a true vision of human rights. So after that, begin my international destiny. It's a contradiction, a new contradiction. Because I can say to you, I am not a traveler. I hate travelers. As Deleuze, it's a common point with Deleuze. Deleuze was not at all a traveler, but Deleuze was more systematic than me, because the consequence was he does not travel. Me, I am not a traveler, but I am always in traveling. So it's a contradiction, the contradiction of the nomad and the sedentary, which is really maybe a very important contradiction for me. I am a sedentary, and my duty is to be a nomad. So when I am with great pleasure with you, I am not in my very nature, you know. My very nature is to be sit in a quiet place, writing a play or a novel. And my duty my duty of philosopher is to address to everybody. And everybody today is everybody in the world. It's not everybody only in Greece, in Germany, no, or in Roman Empire. I must address to everybody because it's a destiny of philosophy, and because I recognize the ability of every individual to become a subject. And I can give my help to this process. So after ethics, from many countries come the demand to travel, to go here and there and so on. A sort of international nomadism of philosophy today. And I have given many lectures in the United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Slovenia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Korea, Australia, Mexico, Austria. And here to the United States. As you can understand, I was an enemy of the United States. I pertain the common idea in the world that the United States is a monster, an historical monster. And it's true. Because the United States is the most powerful imperialism today. It's a center of world capitalism and so on. And so, by nature, from my small country, France, which has been a great country and now is a sort of province of the world, I was an enemy of the United States. As millions and millions and millions of people today in the world. But I finally give lecture in the United States practically every year. And very often with 2 travels a year to this country, to this, in my opinion, my first opinion, horrible country, during many years. And today, I have many friends here, many very good friends here in the United States. And in some sense, I love the United States. What I am loving in the United States, naturally not the state, not the state of the United States, neither the states nor the state. And I don't love the dominant organization of this country. And I don't love the international politics of the United States and so on. But I love that we can find in this country, because in some sense it's a savage country. Not completely civilized. But we have the strength of what is savage. That is, we can find in the country many people who are convinced that it is possible to become a subject. And would search something like that. Who are, in some sense, the heroes of this country. Not the military heroes, not the heroes of imperialism, not the heroes of the conquest of the world, but the subjective heroism and courage to become a subject in a country where in fact it's very difficult. where the general opinion is to live without any ID, to live with business and not with ID. It's the law of this country. But precisely, there is a strength of the exception of this law. And we find more than in France, because France is an old country. Everybody is skeptic. Everybody thinks that he who is very good. Is where is a thinker, is where knows the truth. And the truth is finally that it is better to do nothing. It's not the idea here. Here is something very different. The society in its totality is very oppressive, in fact. But it's something like a savage oppression. The oppression of the capital, the nude capital, something like that. And in that sort of oppression by the nude capital, we can find very sympathetic and admirable exceptions. People like you, in fact. People that search the way to become a subject in the very difficult position of to be a citizen of the United States. And many strangers too, because the composition of this country, the strength of this country is that there is people of every point of the world. It's not, there is not at all the possibility to speak of an American race. Yes, it has been the contradiction between white and black and so on. But finally, everybody knows that United States is a fundamental mixture of all we can find in the world. And in this mixture, under the law of capitalism, which creates the unity of the mixture, we can find a sort of new possibility to become a subject as an exception. But why I love this country, you know, now, because in this country there is an horrible law and many exceptions. Horrible law, general law, it's not the juridical law, the law of the world, the acceptation of the strength of capitalism, and the acceptation of the sovereignty of money, and so on. The idea that to live is to have money, something like that. All that is in America from the beginning, And, but there exist many exceptions. And many exceptions, and to be an exception is a hard fight. It is not quite becoming. That is my praise of United States. And so, finally, across all that, we can speak, for me, of a transformation of my vision of politics. What is striking for me today concerning politics is the contradiction between local situation and global situation. Situation in a town, in a factory, in a village, in a small country, and situation in the world. In the world, we have more and more domination of pure capitalism. It was a prevision of Marx. Marx has said the mondial market is the law of capitalism itself, and we are now in the global market. And so what we true in the United States is now true in China, in India, and finally in every place of the world. So the United States has been victorious in some sense. Victorious against the Soviet Union, concretely, but at a more important level, the spirit of United States has been victorious at the scale of the world. But it's not true locally. Locally, we can have some fights, some experience, some attempt to become a subject, a collective subject. And it was the first dimension, localization. Localization of political experiences. We are not in the idea today to take the power, to take the state power. We are not exactly the idea of revolutionary action. If revolutionary action is to take the power, the state power. We are much more in local actions which create the possibility to new relationship between intellectual and workers, intellectual and poor, between, as yesterday explained Cécile, between the developed world and Africa, and so on. So locally, with obstination, with patience, we can create something which is really an exception to the general law. It's not a creation of the big exception at the level of the state, but is a possible exception in a local place with creation of really something new. My personal example has been the reduction of my concrete political activity to one central and localized question. The question of the status of immigrant workers in France. The status, more precisely, of undocumented workers in France. And it was a very important fight in France. Because the status of immigrant workers, of undocumented workers, was the sign of separation between two positions, two radical positions. The position which was an immigrant worker is not a French, and so no right at all for him or her. And the other position was we recognize the ability of an immigrant worker to become a subject. And we were for this possibility. And there is a very long story of this problem in France and in many other countries of Europe, in fact, which is, in some sense, a classical fight against racism, but which in fact is a political determination under the law of a new vision of society. Between the question of between identities and genericity. You know, yesterday I explained that the truth is a generic multiplicity. That is, that the truth is universal because precisely a truth is not reducible to any identity. A truth cannot be a German truth. A truth cannot be a French truth. And the truth cannot be a white truth or a black truth, and so on. And so, finally, a truth, when a truth exists, it exists without a clear relationship to a precise identity. And this is why a truth is universal. And in fact, when we act with undocumented workers, immigrant workers, and so on, we are affirming that the truth of the society itself must be, in some sense, a generic one. So my country cannot be defined by an identity. It must be defined by a form of relationship to universality. Naturally, something like France exists, but the true destiny of a country is to be in close relationship to universality and not to be closed on its proper identity. And it is why this political conflict, very precise, for example, to obtain papers, official papers for immigrant workers, it was a very concrete fight. This very concrete fight was in fact a realization, a local realization of the contradiction between identity and genericity. At the global level, I propose to organize at the scale of the world an ideological discussion around the word communism. It was a very simple proposition. Everybody will give sense, not completely negative, to the word communism today. Let's discuss concerning the new meaning, the possible new meaning of the word communism as a name for the general orientation of humanity. And so, with my friend Slavoj Žižek, we organize some international sessions concerning the word, communism, with open discussion, actually. It was not the creation of a political organization, of a new international. It was something like a preparation, maybe one day or something like that, by a free discussion at the level of the world concerning the destiny of the word communism and the meaning of this word. And we did that in London, in Berlin, in New York, in Seoul, and we have the project to do that in South America, probably in Bolivia, and in Africa, probably in South Africa, and after that, to examine the situation. And you know, I have said, okay, subjectivization is ideology and organization. You know, my proper political situation today is to have some practices at the level of organization locally, small organization, precarious organization, but something organized with undocumented workers, for example. At the level of the world is much more ideological today. And the hope is one day we can connect the two and have something like organization at the global level, which is also in close relationship with all local experiences in the direction of the true rights of humanity. Across all that, my question my philosophical question becomes, what is the world, after all? What is the world? What is the relationship between the truth and the world where this truth is localized at the beginning? Because in my vision, naturally, a truth is created after an event. But an event is always somewhere. An event is not in the sky. So we can say an event is always an event for a determined world. But if the truth is universal, what is the relationship finally between the truth as universal and the world where the truth is localized by the event? After all, a world is always something particular. And if a truth, the birth of the truth, is localized in the world, how the truth can be universal? First ontological answer is because the multiplicity is generic. I explained this point. That is, the creation of the truth creates a multiplicity which is in the world, but not reducible to the encyclopedia of the world, which has no names in the world, and so on. So it's an exception to the world, inside the world. But it's not completely sufficient to abstract to ontological if we don't explain more precisely what is the world, what is the constraints of the world. Because the objection is, okay, generic, but generic for this world. Maybe not generic for another world. So finally, particular. It's a very difficult objection. And so I begin to think and to have meditation concerning what is the world. You know, first, I recapitulate my philosophical history. I begin by the question, what is a subject? Theory of the subject. And it was because the question of the revolutionary subject was very important for me. Is exist something like a revolutionary subject, finally? Is it the class? Is it the party? What is the subject in the political field? Individuals? So my first question was theory of the subject. But the result of the theory of the subject was many new questions. And the first question was, what is the ontological context for the apparition of a subject, a new subject? What is the basis of all that? And so it's being an event. Being an event, I introduce the idea that you are at the very beginning of the subject, you have a rupture and not a continuity. Rupture between being and event. So being positive multiplicity and rupture, or if you want, discontinuity. Discontinuity between being and what happens, between what is and what happens. And it's from this primitive rupture that I determine the concept of a truth, finally. But it's at the level very abstract. It is why, in some sense, it's largely a mathematical level. Because being is thing, thought, as pure multiplicity. And theory of pure multiplicity is historically mathematics. So ontology is of mathematical nature, and all that is a beautiful machine, but at a very abstract level. So the question of the world is less abstract. It's not the pure situation that is multiplicity as such, but with determination. And in particular, determination of what is a localization. How we can speak of to be somewhere. Not with an answer, okay, a multiplicity is somewhere because a multiplicity is in another multiplicity. To be inside a multiplicity is not too concrete. Okay. And so the idea was really to find a concept of localization. Localization in a world. And the idea is that finally, precisely a world must be defined like a possibility of localization. What is a world? A world is when we can say, I am here in this world. It's localization. And so if you want a more scientific word, the conception of a world is topologic. It's a topology. Topology, science of the place. And you know, it's really a correlation with my political situation, because my political situation was precisely the difference between localization and globalization. And so the world is the general thinking of the sort of situation. What is to be localized? What we are saying when we say, I am from United States, as a word, or I am a friend, or the truth, the political truth of revolutionary has been discovered in Russia in 1970. What is the signification of somewhere? And I have proposed, as I always do, a very simple solution, which can be recapitulated in a diagram. At the beginning, we have only ontological definition. Ontological definition is multiplicities of multiplicities. If you want, the things of the world in their being are multiplicities. The ontological definition of a thing is that a thing is a pure multiplicity. And so, in some sense, a world is always a complex of multiplicity. Naturally, many multiplicities, because we have multiplicities inside another multiplicities, for example, another inside, or like that, or like the total of all that, and so on. So we can say that every world is infinite. Every world is infinite. Every world is an infinite composition of multiplicity. But all that is strictly ontological. We cannot have any possibility to say that you are here in the world. No? So the localization is not possible. And you have no real means to say what is the difference between two multiplicities. Alors, you can say maybe this one is a multiplicity which is greater than this one. Okay, but it's only quantitative difference. We have no idea of qualitative difference between the two. Okay? Or a word, a localization, is always qualitative and not only quantitative. If I am somewhere, it's my place and is not the same place than the other place for qualitative reasons and not only quantitative. So all the point is to give a definition of what is a qualitative difference between two multiplicities. Well, there is many other problems, but the center of the question is to define what is a qualitative difference between two multiplicities. Not a difference brutal, this one is not this one, but with possibility to say something is very different, less different, not too much different, etc. So to have qualitative degrees of difference. And so the world is all that with inside the world something like an order which goes from 0 to, or from mu to m. That is to a minimum to a maximum. And if we take two different things in the world, we always have a point in the order which is the degree of difference between the two. Okay? This degree is somewhere between the minimum and the maximum. The signification is very simple. P, technically, P is a function for the mathematical spirit here. P is a function from every pair of multiplicity to a point in the order. But the interpretation is very simple. You say that the degree of identity between the two is P. So P is only the possibility to think the degree of difference of identity between the two things of the world. Alors, for example, is this P is the minimum. That is that the degree of identity between the two is 0. So the two things are absolutely different. Naturally, if identity between two things is null, the difference is maximal. So they are absolutely different. If the degree of identity is the maximum, the two things are absolutely the same, absolutely identical. But pay attention, all that is not absolute. All that is relatively at the world itself. These two things in this world are absolutely different if this function is 0, absolutely identical in this function is the maximum. And so the world prescribes to the things possible degrees of identity and difference. And it is why we enter in a qualitative world. Because there are possibilities, if the function is P, that the two things are neither completely different nor completely identical. So they can be similar, they can be very near, or they have something in common, and so on. So you can have with all the possibilities between the minimum and the maximum to have all the nuances of identity and difference, all the qualitative possibilities of relationship to something else. Absolutely identical, absolutely different, and neither completely identical nor completely different, but between the two. If we say that this person has something in common with this other person, we are saying that there is a P somewhere between the minimum and the maximum. Okay, you understand, very simple. And all this machinery is a world. Is a world. And I name the latent order. There is a world because there exists this form of order, the transcendental of the world. So, in Kantian filiation, so the transcendental of the world is the possibility to have comparison, qualitative comparison, between two things in the world. Similarity, identity, difference, and so on. Naturally, the world is very complex, with many colors, with many nuances, if you have many possibilities between the minimum and the maximum. It is much more drastic, much more simple if you have few possibilities. And for example, the simplest world is when we have only two possibilities, absolutely different or absolutely identical. It's the ontological world. The ontological world is when the thing is the thing, and no other thing can be identical in any sense. So we return to ontology when there exists no many qualitative differences, but only two possibilities, to be the thing or not to be the thing. The Hamletian possibility, to be or not to be. The world of Hamlet is a world where there exists only maximum, to be, and minimum, not to be. And in fact is the ontological world. Because a multiplicity is the multiplicity, and another multiplicity is completely different. So we can understand that finally a qualitative world is something like a new complexity in the ontological world. In the ontological world, we have only the possibility to be inside or outside. In a concrete world, in a physical world, which is not ontological but physical, real, material, we have generally many possibilities. Many possibilities. Between to be absolutely identical and to be absolutely different. And we know perfectly that because it's precisely the point, the political point of identity, difference, and so on. When we say that I am of this world and this one is not of this world, you are saying that the difference between you and him is absolute difference. So that the measure of the identity is null. Racism is only to consider that something else, with something else, the relationship with this something else is zero. And the universalism is to say that at the level of the ability to become a subject, the relationship to any human being to another human being is identical, maximal identity. We are the same. We are all the same. Generally, in concrete life, we are between the two. Because there are some people we love and some people we hate. And it's when we hate is much more on the side. And we love is, I don't say, to go on the side. You know, once more, this diagram explains all what you want. And the more subtle point is the point of now. Is there a possibility in the world to have a relationship of a multiple to itself? It can be the system of evaluation be extended to the relationship to a multiplicity to itself? And the answer is yes. Yes. We can exist in the world less or more. I can say that I pertain to this world, absolutely. For example, if I am in France, I can say my relationship to myself from the point of view of this world, France, is pure identity. When I am here, I am in some sense a stranger. That's, to be a stranger is a relation to myself, not only a relation to the other. I know that I am a stranger. So here, my existence is not completely adequate to the world because I am a stranger in this world. No? So I exist in some sense less or more in a concrete world. And sometimes, if I take different form of world, I know that I am not completely in the world where I am. And sometimes we know the feeling of that. When I am completely in the world, it's something like happiness to be here. And if I am not completely in the world, is trouble, existential trouble. I know that I am a stranger, or I am many reasons to be like that. And so, this relationship is the measure by the transcendental, because this relationship has a degree, as the other, is the measure of my degrees of existence in a determinate world. If I exist completely under all the laws of the world, this relation has a value maximal. If I am a stranger with trouble, not completely in the world, I don't understand the language, and so on, progressively, my relationship to myself, relatively of the world, not my general relationship with myself, which has no sense, but relatively of the world, can be dangerously in the direction of the minimum. And when my existence in the world as the minimal degree, it's the feeling, the interior feeling of to be radically a stranger to the world and to do not really exist in the world. And all that, you are many very complex examples, but I cannot speak about that indefinitely. But, oh yes, but you know, for example, when you are, uh, uh, when you have a dream, it's and you are in the world of the dream, you have the concrete feeling of to be and not to be in the world. You exist in the world of the dream in some sense. And you know, it's there is many different dreams. In some dreams, we are really in the world of the dream. And we are completely surprised the morning to, to be in the concrete world. So we become during the night a citizen of the world of the dream. So the existence, the spiritual existence, the reflexive existence of our mind has been, in this case, completely identical to itself from the point of view of the dream. But there is some other dream where we are the stranger in the world. You are not in the world. You know that the world is not our world, and that our existence is not clearly in existence in this world. This is what, in this sense, the relationship to ourself is in the sense of individuality. So, to be somewhere is not a question of yes or no. Is the point. It's not a question of yes or no. You can be completely somewhere. That is in a world, that is in a totality of multiplicity with the transcendental, with the measure of the identity, what I name my book the function of identity. So the identity is not the fact, it's the function, relative to the world. So it's a possibility to be completely somewhere in relation to the transcendental, that is, with a relation to myself in this world which is maximal, or it's a possibility to be in this world in a weak fashion, in a poor fashion, in a precarious, and the identity of myself relatively to this world is in the direction of minimalism. The final form, most important form, is that we have had here a definition of existence in difference to the definition of being. So being an event, the first book, the second being an existence. Being is always a multiplicity, mathematically thinkable. Maybe a very complex multiplicity, infinite multiplicity, multiplicity of many multiplicities, and so on. But ontologically, all what is a multiplicity composed finally from the void to the most complex form of infinity. To exist is not an absolute notion. To exist is to exist in a world, in a determined world. You exist only somewhere. And there is a degree of existence in the world. Your existence in the world can be absolute in a relative sense. It's a paradoxical sentence. Absolute in a relative sense, that is maximal for the transcendental of the world. But you know, when your existence is maximal in the world, from the point of view of the world, it is absolute. Because we cannot exist more than with the dimension maximal. So from outside, it's maximality. From inside, it's absolute existence. You exist absolutely in the world which is considered. But your existence can be also minimal. That is, from the point of view of the world, you do not exist. You don't are in the world. But you don't exist in the world. But you are in the world. So at this point, you have a contradiction between being and existence. The existence is minimal, and being is as over absolute. And why is it contradiction? It is precisely because all that, all absoluteness inside the world is relative to the world. But being is always absolute. The multiplicity you are is the multiplicity you are. The fact that the multiplicity is inside the world is relative to the world. And so, after that, you have a very complex dialectics between being and existence. And to exist is always first relative to the world, and second can be changed. Because your degree of existence can be changed during your life in the world. You know that. In some sense, when an immigrant worker has finally his or her paper, official paper, his or her degree of existence in the world is better. And so part of politics is always in articulation with degrees of existence. Because we can define oppression, the creation for many people, to a small degree of existence in the world. And so very often, politics is creation of a new transcendental of the world, a new fashion to estimate the existence of people, to change the transcendental, to change the order. And was exactly what is said in the great singing of workers, the International. We are nothing, become all. We are nothing, become all. That is, we are here from our existence. We want to be here. It's all that is very simple in some sense. So, you know, the relationship between my political experience and my existential experience. That is the contradiction between nomad and sedentary. So the notion of the multiplicity of the world, finally. There is no one world, there is a multiplicity of worlds. And it's my duty to go from one world to another world and to exist in some degree in other worlds, and so on. Uh, uh, so to become a nomad has been projected in my philosophical work in the form of the theory of the world. We can perfectly understand that a form of political determination can be inscribed in a world, in a place. But if in another world the transcendental is completely different, the problem is not the same. So there is really localization of certain actions political. But at another level, you can have a goal what is finally universal. And so, I propose a new definition of what is a truth. A truth is a multiplicity which is generic in all possible worlds. No? So the experience of the definitive experience of the truth is universality, not only abstract in the sense of the multiplicity is generic, but by the idea that its genericity is also valid in another world. And finally, in all possible worlds. For example, if you have a world where exists the number 2, where in this world 2 and 2 made 4. No possible world where 2 and 2, if 2 is the same multiplicity, and 2 and 2 by 5. So, it's very small, but the final idea is that the truth is something which transits from a world to another world. And it's a condition for the idea of communism. Because if you cannot have any truth which is the same in a world and in other worlds, there is no hope to unify really all humanity under the same idea. Always you return to differences of existence. There is no possibility to be uniquely under the law of being. There is the law of existence, so the law of the world. If something like communism can exist at a general level, it's certainly because there exists something like truth, so multiplicity, which are generic, not only in one world, but in every possible world. And it is why it's impossible to define a communist hypothesis. That is, finally, only the recognition of the fact that every individual is able to become a subject. It's the point, the radical point. The very maxim of the communism is not first no private property and so on. All that is consequences in some sense, possible consequences, material consequences. The point is the recognition of humanity as such. That is radical equality. And equality must be finally equality of material equality. Okay, but first it's equality in the sense of the recognition, the complete recognition of the possibility for every individual to become a subject. And in fact, to become also a political subject, a communist subject. But if we must realize all that, we must go across the world. Because the world is not only the world as our planet, but the world of countries, the world of racial identities, the world of languages, all that. And so truth is a multiplicity which is generic in all possible worlds. And there is a fundamental relationship between the idea of communism and the idea of truth. And this is why relativism is our enemy today. Relativism is our enemy. Culturalism is our enemy. Not because we oppose the recognition of the existence of different worlds, not at all. We accept all differences, not a problem. Naturally, there is different language, different civilization, different histories, different people, and so on. The point is the recognition in all these worlds of the ability of every individual to become a universal subject inside its proper world. But all that is possible only if you can determine the possibility of existence of some multiplicity which are universal, generic in all the worlds. Okay? And relativism is always the idea that when you are in a world, you have your proper truth, and you cannot completely understand the other world. In that sort of context, the only unification is by money. The only thing which is really universal is money. That is the point today. The only thing which is in every world is money. And the question of the existence of money is the question of the value of money. And our world knows perfectly the question of the value of money. But for us, it's the value of human being, which is the question of the value of money. And so, to preserve the value of human being, and not only the value of money, we must understand what is being, pure being, multiplicity, what is the world, what is existence, and to recognize, finally, the equality of existences in different worlds. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, with you, my degree of existence is maximal.
Organiser cet après-midi parce qu'il a compris que ça.
Il ne veut rien organiser cet après-midi.
Si, il veut organiser les choses parce qu'il devait écrire ou te dispenser de la table ronde, voir comment faire par rapport
Oui,
au truc.
il avait dit qu'il voulait faire la table ronde pendant 1 heure, faire la table ronde pendant 1 heure.
D'accord, mais c'est ça qu'il a